This is a horror video. For a better experience, use earphones when you watch this horror story. Being a 16-year-old boy in a small town in America doesn't sound fun, and it's not. Although, for my parents, this town was a dream come true. We are financially stable thanks to the jobs they love. Even though this town is far from being a metropolis, it somehow manages to provide for everyone. The neighborhood we live in is also a beautiful place, full of happy people. The neighbors are kind and caring. People go to the store with a smile on their faces while greeting each other on their way. We all seem to love our little heaven. I don't know exactly when my parents moved in, but at least I'm sure I was born here. My father has rarely said anything about the move-in, so the only source of information was my mother. That day, it was the first time your dad and I felt so loved, she used to say. Though, no matter how hard I tried, I was never able to get the answers I desperately needed. Are the earplugs uncomfortable? They would always assume. That was never the issue. The curiosity was uncomfortable, and sometimes even unbearable. At the beginning, I said I was happy, which is true. But besides love, this town fills my heart with fear too. Here, no one's life is perfect. Should I say, night? We always cover our ears at 2:33 a.m. to not hear the sounds coming from the manhole in the street. It only lasts a minute. That's what my mother told me, at least. I never questioned it because she said not wearing earplugs could result in hearing loss. The earplugs we wear are made of a high-quality reusable wax, so we don't hear anything. It's easy to manipulate a child, and since I didn't want to be deafened, I listened. I've been wearing soundproof earplugs every night for 11 years. As I said earlier, sometimes the curiosity was unbearable. I wanted to hear whatever sounds were coming from the manhole, or at least see what was making them. That's why, one night, with my earplugs in, I peeked out the window at exactly 2:33 a.m. Nothing. There was nothing on the street. I was about to go back to sleep when I saw something from the corner of my eye. My heart was racing as I was looking at the manhole lid, jumping up and down. I immediately closed the blinds and stared at them for the next few seconds, frozen. I remember not being able to fall asleep that night. All I was thinking about was the manhole. Is there a monster living in the sewers? Eventually, tiredness took over my fear and I fell asleep. The next day, I decided to confront my parents about the sounds and the rule. I don't know what I expected, but I do know what I got. Blank stares. That's all. Not a sentence, not a word. For God's sake, just yell at me for peeking out the window. Since that day, months have passed. Years. I still wear earplugs every night. My parents have a different tactic though. They have an alarm set because they stay awake until 3 a.m. I sometimes don't go to sleep either, so every time I hear the feliciter from my parents' bedroom, I knew it was time for the sounds, and it always sent shivers down my spine. I usually have trouble falling asleep because of it. One night, I stayed up until 2:20 a.m. I got lost in the music. After glancing at my watch, I went downstairs for a glass of water. I was looking out the window while I was waiting for my glass to fill. Again, nothing on the street. Once I turned off the faucet, complete silence started ringing in my ears. The feeling was strange. Silence. So quiet, yet so loud. For a moment I thought I was wearing earplugs. Even though the silence was absolute, I wasn't the only one in the room. I screamed when I saw someone sitting at the dining table. It took me some time to realize that the scary silhouette was my father. "Dad?" I stuttered. He didn't turn around. He didn't even acknowledge my existence. "What are you doing here? And where are your earplugs? It's almost 2:33 a.m, I asked, confused. "Sit down," he said calmly. I didn't want to be lectured about staying up late, so I ignored his request. My father let out a sigh and said again, "Sit down." Getting on his bad side was not on my wish list, so this time I listened. "What time is it?" he asked after I took a seat. "Dad, it's almost 2:33 a.m. What are you doing?" I asked again nervously. He didn't answer. Instead, he got up and grabbed a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. I can't drink that," I said. "Sure you can," he calmly replied. After pouring the Tempranillo wine, he said, "We're waiting." I didn't understand at first. For what? I rushed to ask. He ignored the question again and took the first sip of his wine. That's when I realized. No, we're not doing that. Are you out of your mind?" I yelled. "Have you ever wondered what ruins your life?" he said, out of nowhere. I had to think about that sentence for a moment. "Are you truly happy, John?" he continued. This time, I was the one who wasn't answering. I didn't know what to say. The series of unexpected questions left me stunned. I looked at the clock hanging on the wall. "Dad, the sounds are about to start," I finally said timidly. The alarm went off too, scaring the life out of me. That was the last warning before the storm. My father took another sip of his wine. "Son, there are no sounds," he said. I refused to believe that. I was running out of time, so I jumped out of my chair and ran upstairs as fast as I possibly could. I managed to put in the earplugs before 2:33 a.m. I was just standing there in the middle of the room, waiting for the sounds to end. The strange thing is, I don't remember falling asleep. It felt as if the whole night had gotten blown away by the wind. In the morning, I looked for my dad downstairs. I don't know why I expected him to still be there. Someone else was sitting at the table, though. It was my mum. She was in tears. "What happened?" I asked, worried. "John, sit down." The same place felt so much different. The wine bottle on the table was still there, and yet everything seemed new. "Your father lost his job yesterday." I was stunned. "I don't know where he is. He's probably trying to get his job back, but I doubt he will succeed," she said and started drinking straight from the bottle. I could feel my face turn red. My palms were sweating as I started breathing rapidly. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked. I looked at her. I started to cry. That's when I realized he wasn't trying to get his job back. He tried to get his life back. It's been 3 months since I lost my father. It's tragic, but above all, it left a huge hole in me. Even though nothing has directly told me, I can feel that he's down there, somewhere. Down in the sewers along with everyone curious. I loved my father, and it took him. Is it a monster? A ghost? A black hole? I'm not sure. All I know is that I'll keep wearing my earplugs to not find out. At the end of the day, we're the ones who, without permission, settled down in someone's world. It doesn't matter if it's under the ground. It still belongs to someone or something. And if covering our ears is the only rule we have to follow to have access to its magic, I'll make sure not to break it.
The diary entries of a killer's victim. So, I have recently inherited some family valuables. With it came this box from a relative called Sarah, my mother's great-grandmother. For some context, I was looking through her box and found her diary from the year 1919, over 100 years ago. Of course, I started reading through it and found something truly disturbing written in it. Here are my findings.
September 1st, 1919. My name is Sarah Lawman.
and I am being stalked by the Axeman of New Orleans. I am quite certain it is him who is stalking me. My family thinks I'm being paranoid, but I know that I will be dead in a few days if all continues on like this. I put down my diary and pencil to look out the window of my house. I was being watched again. I just knew it. I could feel it in my bones. He's out there, and he's coming to get me. After the letter of March 13th, I had been playing jazz music as a form of protection. It didn't seem to be working now. I have attached a copy of the official Axeman's letter to this page for my future reference.
Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them try not to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the Angel of Death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt punish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy. The Axeman.
I kept another copy of it and fastened it to my wall in case I ever forget to play the jazz that this so-called demon likes. Maybe the jazz night was a huge prank made up by the Axeman, just to prove that he was powerful, that he could strike fear into the city's heart by a simple letter. I dread the sun going down, although the constant worry only makes it come quicker. I get ready for sleep to take me, and pray that tonight will not be the night that the Axeman will strike. September 2nd, 1919. Today I made the journey to town and picked up some big nails that I stuck into my doorframe. This effectively stops it from being moved. On my way into town, I took my axe and dropped it far into the woods. Before leaving it, I carved SL into it. I hope all of these measures will stop the incoming attack from the Axeman, but something deep down tells me that nothing will. As I put down my diary on my bedside table, and blow out the candles around me. I am again praying for another night of peace from the Axeman's terror. September 3rd, 1919. I will not live through the next 24 hours. This feeling of dread keeps striking me, and I don't know what to do about it. Should I stay here at my house and just ride this feeling out, or go and spend the night with my family across town? I am but only 19 years old. I'm not ready to die just yet. I still have my life ahead of me. September 28th, 1920. My name is Sarah Lawman, and 1 year and 25 days ago, I was a victim of the Axeman. I think. The nails are still in my door. I don't know why. The Axeman hasn't terrorized this city for about 11 months. I guess I'm just damaged from the experience. I don't remember the attack myself, but notes keep appearing. Every time I wake up each morning, a new note is in my hands, on my bedside table, or on my pillow next to me. They all say the same thing. You are a victim of the Axeman. Keep fighting. Today, when I woke up to see the almost familiar note sitting in my hands, it read something different. All it said was, "Run." That was all the entries I could find. The rest of the diary pages were left empty. The year-long gap between the last two entries confused me a little. Now, I thought that this was quite a good read. If you know me and my family, then you'll know we play pranks on each other all the time. So, as I was about to send a text to my mom saying how good she had gotten me, I paused and instead opened up Google and typed in Sarah Lawman. And I wish I never did, because what I found was possibly more horrific than the diary entries. What loaded up on the screen was tons and tons of articles about the near murder of a girl named Sarah Lawman. I clicked on one of them, and what came up was the report she gave to the New Orleans police station. I was writing in my diary that night, and I heard a branch outside snap. I was already quite on edge, as I had felt uneasy that whole day, so I had assumed the worst. I blew out the candle beside me and walked around my bed to try and hide from the noises I could hear. My door rattled, and all I could think was, "Oh God, he's going to break a door panel like with all of his other victims." And the door shakes some more, and I thought, maybe the nails I put in yesterday would work. Maybe he would give up and go on to his next victim. Clearly I wasn't that lucky, as you're interviewing me from my hospital bed. My window then opened, and all I can remember was thinking, shit! I actually saw him land in my kitchen. All the witness accounts were somewhat correct. Tall, large, looming figure. The dark obscured all noticeable features. My hand covered my mouth in an attempt to quiet my breathing. It didn't seem like it worked, however, as I saw his head slowly turn to face me. Knowing that he had definitely seen me now, I decided to try and make a run for the door. He and his dreaded axe found me first. He swings it into my back, making my knees hit the floor. I guess this is it, I remembered thinking. He brought the axe down again. This time, it hit the side of my head, robbing my future of my past memory. Of course this would happen. He could keep on killing since I'm about to forget his face. I can't forget his face. I can't let him keep killing. I have to do something. But nothing was done, and my world went black. I woke up here a few days later, and I was told that my neighbors appeared after they heard the screaming, kicked in my door, and found my body. They took me to the hospital, and I recovered. Physically, not so much mentally. That was the end of that article. The next one I clicked on was a missing persons report from 1920. Sarah Lawman, reported missing on September 29th, 1920. No one will tell me what happened to her. Not even my own mother. They just keep saying I'll learn soon enough, but that isn't enough for me. Maybe I'll have to start using my great-great-great-grandfather's technique once more. People still own axes, right?
The apartment next door is empty again. When we first moved in, our neighbours were a middle-aged doctor and his girlfriend. Carrying all our furniture upstairs proved to be quite the challenge, so we were happily surprised when he offered to help. Although we didn't talk much that day, beyond pleasantries, he seemed like a nice guy. I saw him around a few times after that, bumping into him while checking the mailbox or going down the stairs. He'd smile and nod, and I'd smile back. As far as the neighbours go, he was one of the good ones. I'm not the most social person, however, so it took me some time to realise that I hadn't seen him in a while. I asked my boyfriend and got the same answer from him. If our neighbour had been outside recently, our paths hadn't crossed. Neither of us worried about it. We could hear him moving around after all, and it wasn't like we were close. Over the next few weeks, little grievances started to pile up in regards to our neighbour. He'd step out in the middle of the night, activating the automatic lights that filtered in through the bedroom window. Sometimes he'd bang on the shared wall in the middle of the day. Always twice in rapid succession, but never at a set time. I was tempted to bang back, but figured it wasn't worth a potential argument. The strangest thing I remember is seeing his shadow through our front door on a particular night in September. It wasn't unusual, seeing as he had to pass our door to reach his own, but when I went to the toilet half an hour later, I noticed the shadow was still there. That was the first time an uneasy feeling came over me. As suddenly as the disturbances had started, they disappeared again. Everything was quiet for 2 weeks, and my boyfriend and I were grateful for this newfound peace. The for rent sign appeared at the start of the third week. Neither of us took much notice of it, aside for a passing comment. We expected to hear the doctor and his girlfriend move out at one point, but we never heard or saw them again. The next set of neighbours got on our nerves from day one. They had a young child with them, and appeared to believe that proper parenting included regular screaming matches. We learned to tune them out over time, and by the time December rolled around, their voices had become little more than background noise. I saw them for the first time while returning from a shopping trip on a chilly December afternoon. A tight-lipped smile was the only greeting I could muster up for them, but they didn't appear to notice. They kept looking straight ahead and passed me without a word. I remember the shiver that ran down my neck to my spine when they were right next to me. Although the uncomfortable feeling remained as my eyes followed the couple, I couldn't bring myself to look away. I watched them reach the door and stand motionless for a good 3 minutes before the husband fished his keys out of his pocket and opened the door. When the time came for me to walk to my own front door, I made sure I had my keys ready. As far as unlocking the door and throwing yourself inside goes, I'm sure I broke the record that day. The banging started not long after, always twice, never at the same time. I brought it up to my boyfriend, who brushed it off as one of the disadvantages of apartment living. I didn't tell him about the hint of fear that was growing in the pit of my stomach, afraid he'd laugh at my paranoia. You see, I'm the type of person that likes to watch a horror movie, but can't walk down the hallway alone after doing so. Not the bravest of the bunch by any means. Working from home meant that I had plenty of time to sit and worry about every single noise I heard, or more specifically, didn't hear. The screaming had stopped by then, and however unusual it may be, I kind of missed it. There was only silence and the periodic banging against the wall. I took to working with music in the background. The lights outside came on at 4:37 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I had to use the toilet and would have stayed in bed if it had been closer to the time I'd normally wake up. Ready to go right back to sleep after relieving myself, I didn't bother turning on the lights in the hallway. I rounded the corner and found myself looking right at the shadow of what could have only been a child, swaying gently back and forth. The toilet, which is only a few steps from our front door, suddenly seemed to be miles away. As badly as I had to go, my feet were glued to the floor. The thought of taking even a single step closer to that shadow made me feel sick to my stomach. I slowly backed away and returned to the bedroom. Despite my reservations, I ended up shaking my boyfriend awake. "I think the neighbour's kids are standing outside," I told him. "It's freezing, Should we call the police? My boyfriend, disoriented and still half asleep, stumbled towards the front door. I followed a few steps behind, ready to make a run for it. Are you sure you didn't imagine it? He asked me. The light was still on, but the shadow was no longer there. I shook my head. If there was one thing I was certain of, it was that someone had been standing there only minutes ago. All right, I'll take a look outside. He moved to get the keys and I felt nausea return tenfold. No, I said quickly, grabbing hold of his arm. You're probably right, I must have been imagining it. Let's just go back to bed. The rational part of my brain told me I was a horrible person leaving a child outside in the cold at this hour, but I kept my mouth shut. I felt in my gut that opening the door wasn't safe. I didn't end up going to the toilet after all that night. The fourth couple moved in a month and a half ago. I'm used to it now, the banging, the shadows, the ever-present chill that doesn't seem to go away, the return of the for rent sign, and the new tenants. Rinse and repeat. I tried a couple more times to talk about it with my boyfriend, but he doesn't seem to pick up on any of these occurrences. We're looking at houses now, and I can only pray we'll find one soon. I'll buy anything if it means I get to move out of this apartment. I no longer acknowledge new tenants because I fear they might end up inviting me inside. I guess I'll never know for sure, but I don't think the people who enter the apartment ever truly leave. Have you ever heard of the Lady in Red? I mean, it's only a folktale, but many say it isn't. I myself know it's only a legend, but my friends think otherwise. Eventually, I got tired of arguing with them and decided to settle this once and for all. So when we were all in town for a sleepover, we decided to play her game. Back in the few months before I started high school, I happened to get back in touch with some of my old friends from grade school. It had been years since I'd heard from them, and since I didn't have any other friends, I'd spend most of my time talking to them. The one who started all this was named Landon. We had a lot in common. We played video games, liked the same movies, and most importantly, we were into urban legends and scary stories. I never believed any of them, but he believed there might be some truth to them. He wanted to try one of these games he'd heard about online, out for himself. In order to play, first you need a big building or space with lots of hiding spots, like an abandoned office building or mall. Next, you need a group of 5 people. It must be exactly 5, no more, no less. Thirdly, each player needs a candle, matches, some form of food, and something from their childhood. Lastly, you can't speak during the game, eat or drink, and you must not, under any circumstances, leave the building or quit during the game. Lucky for us, there was a mall not too far away that was almost entirely abandoned, and part of it fit the criteria. There was a problem though. There were only 4 of us. Me, Landon, Seth, and Mikkel. As the 4 of us are sitting there, trying to think of who to bring, Landon's older sister, Mattie, walks into the room. She really doesn't like this kind of stuff, but after some pleading, we convince her to come too. As for the candles and matches, I have lots at home, so we decide to swing by my house before we go. For the last 2, we all decide to bring our own things. Now that our minds are made up, tomorrow night is when we decided to meet up to do it. I was the first one to wake up, so I ran home and got the candles and matches, along with some crackers I had for food, and a small blue bunny doll I had when I was little. I also brought my camera to catch the look on their faces when it doesn't work. I hurried back before everyone woke up and waited at the kitchen table diagramming the story so far, as to tell other believers it was fake and nothing happened. An hour or so passes before they all finally wake up and get ready to go. I go over the preparation rules once more, and everyone brings me their food and childhood items to put in a bag with everything else. We were going to head over early to check out the place and make sure it's still there. It was around 5 PM when we finally got there. The building looked forgotten as ever. Better ones were built up all around it. Then you have this sorry piece of concrete, older than time. I used to come here a lot when I was really little, back in the early 2010s, when this place was bustling with life. There were dozens of stores and everything was always packed with people. But that was a long time ago, and the building is almost abandoned except for a bookstore and restaurant or two. After breaking our way through the almost empty halls, we came to a set of big glass doors. Behind those doors were the remnants of a high-end clothes store that shut down a long time ago. It was 3 floors tall and had tons of walls and shelves. This place looked perfect for their dumb little game. At around 9 p.m, we finally decided to get this started. We cleared an area on the floor and I asked how to play, hoping someone knew. Of course, Landon knew the rules. Great. He was the one into it the most. So, I guess the game looks pretty easy to set up, explained Landon. All you have to do is put the 5 toys in a circle, then place their food in front of it. Then each person puts a candle by their toy and lights it, then holds another one unlit. You then light your candle with the lit one by your toy and then walk up as high as you can. One person stands in each corner of the building and hides whilst the 5th person stands in the middle of the candle toy ring. Okay, I guess that's simple enough, I said. I really have no idea what happens next though, but I think the person in the middle of the ring is called the sheep, and the rest of the people have to try and hide from them, but they can't stay in the same place for more than 5 minutes, Landon continued to explain. They also need to keep their candles lit. If it goes out, the person has 13 minutes to get it relit from another candle, or they lose. All you've got to do is stay alive, basically. Okay, everyone, just to recap. Put your toy first candle and the food in this circle. Light your first candle, then use your lit one to light the other candle, I decided to surmise. One person stays in the circle, while the other 4 hide in the corners. No talking, eating, drinking, or leaving the game prematurely. Keep your candles lit, and only stay in one spot for less than 5 minutes. Are you sure you're not making some of this up? The game starts at midnight and ends at sunrise. In order to win the game, you need to be back in the circle and extinguish the candle you've been holding. Then you can leave the building safely. Okay, it's getting to be about midnight, so we're starting the game. We all arrange our things in a circle and get ready to light our candles. We decide the one that should be in the circle is Mikkel, because he is probably the most scared of the game, and if it's fake, he'd feel better about it. We decide if nothing happens in 5 minutes of the starting of the game, we'd all meet back by the circle. We all get ready and count it down. 3, 2, 1. Go! We all lit our candles and got to our corners. We waited about 5 minutes, and I decided to call it a day because of course it's fake and they'd finally get it. I headed back to the circle, only to find everything was gone, except a thin black circle on the ground where the candles had been. No sign of Mikkel anywhere, which was strange. I headed off to go look for everyone, and when I turned around I saw a faint glow coming from another aisle. I rushed over hoping to find one of my friends, but instead I saw something else. She was pale, very pale, and she had very long unkempt black hair. She was wearing a long gown of some sort that looked like it was made of bloodied human flesh. In her chest was a hole filled with candlelight. I didn't want to believe it. Standing right in front of me was the lady in red. I quietly backed up and ran the other way before she saw me, eventually ducking around some shelves. I needed to find everyone else. I ran back upstairs to where I'd been at the beginning of the game. I'd follow the wall to my left until I found someone. That someone just happened to be Seth. He tried to say something, but I shushed him and gave him my notebook to write what he was trying to tell me. "Where is everyone?" wrote Seth. "I've been looking for an hour, and when I went to go check on Mikkel, like we said, he was gone." "I know, I went too. He was gone also," I replied. "But I did find the lady in red. She's real. This isn't just another urban legend, and I think she's killed Mikkel. Her dress looked like it was made out of blood and flesh. Why did we ever think this was a good idea? We decided on looking for everyone else in the meantime. I kept going left and he'll go right, and hopefully we'll meet in the middle of the store. I went on my way, and it didn't take long to run into Matty, who was walking around in the area of the store that was still, for some reason, full of furniture. It must have been a break room of sorts. I quickly showed her Seth and I's conversation from earlier, and she agreed to follow me. So she grabbed her candle, and we went searching for her brother, who is the only other person I haven't seen yet. We kept going when I tripped on something, which made me drop everything I was holding. I got all my things back together and went to see what had tripped me. To my horror, it was those same spindly black hairs that belonged to the lady. They were everywhere, on the walls, floors and ceilings, all of it spiderwebbing out of the center of the building. It was amazing, since even though I had been paying attention to my surroundings, I hadn't seen any of this since the hair was so thin. It was almost invisible, like thread. I followed some of the lines with my fingers, trying to get across the message that there was something there, but Matty couldn't see it. I mean, it was like 2 a.m. and almost pitch black. The only light was from our dim candles. It didn't really matter all that much, so I shrugged and we kept searching. We stopped to take a break after walking for what seemed like forever, when we heard a loud thud. Almost like something big was knocked over. We could pretty much guess who it was. I mean, it could only be 2 people. So we followed the long empty aisles of shelves until we found where we thought the noise came from. What we found there was a dark mass of hair. It seemed to be pulsing, with a black goo oozing out of the cracks of this 6-foot-tall pod. Horrified, I stumbled backwards into something. No, not something. Someone. I scrambled to my feet to see who I'd found, and finally, after 3 hours, we found Landon. After seeing it was him, Matty stopped hiding behind a shelf and came over to where we were standing. I showed him my notebook, and he explained he already knew because he ran into Seth. Speaking of Seth, where is he now? I asked. We all looked at each other and realized now we'd have to go find him. We set out into the middle of the store, which had a balcony hanging over the first floor, from where we started the game. Now the only exits in the building were connected to the center of the first floor, which was where the circle was. The doors were all glass, and they took up most of the northmost wall. This allowed the room to be bathed in a pale white moonlight, which illuminated the room enough to see a shadowy figure coming towards us. Then a blood-curdling scream split the darkness as the lady sprinted at us almost gracefully, her steps not making a single sound. We looked at each other, then zigzagged through this maze of boxes and shelves until we thought we'd gone far enough. But another shadow moved towards us. As we prepared for the worst, it walked closer and into my field of view, and to our relief, it was Seth. We all sat down because we've been moving around this building for 5 hours now. This is when I noticed something was wrong. It was dim, for there being 4 candles. I looked around. Matty's candle was missing. She must have lost it when we were running. She has a look on her face that she'd already come to terms with this. There isn't much I can do. The time's almost up, if I counted right. Right on cue, she starts choking and coughing. When they check on her, she's laying in a puddle in the same black ooze from earlier. Then out of the ground and the walls, the hair shoots out like knives, ripping her apart. Landon runs towards the circle of candles in a blind rage. I don't think I'd be able to keep up with him. Seth covers his face and starts shaking violently. He shouts out, "No! This is too far! First Mikkel, now Matty, I quit!" He started for the exit, and I ran behind him trying to stop him. He eventually gets to the doors, flings one open, and he finds an open void where the outside ground should be. The hair shoots out and drags him down into the darkness, leaving me entirely alone. It's been 6 hours. 30 minutes until sunrise. I can survive this. I should just walk around to get my mind off everything. 5 minutes. I'm going to head to the circle now. I shouldn't be too far away. As I get closer, the hair gets thicker and drips with more of the black ooze. 1 minute. I'm standing there, getting ready to end this game. And behind me, I hear a scraping noise. I turn to see what it is. No surprise there. It's the lady. Behind her looks to be Landon running at her. He jumps at her, grabbing a knife from his pocket and stabbing it into her eye. He grabs her throat, but her hair shot out and wrapped around his neck and limbs. Her hair, thin but sharp as razors, cutting into his neck. She rips off his arm, then she takes one step closer. She smiles at him, the eye he gouged out showing a hollow space only disturbed by the pinprick of candlelight showing from her skull. Before decapitating him and flinging his lifeless body to the ground beside her, she stares at me before taking one slow step in my direction. Then another. I finally come to my senses and start running for the circle. Just as I make it, she does too. I quickly throw down my candle and the room explodes in flames that burn blue. I must have passed out, because when I came to, I was laying on the floor and there was no sign of anyone. The sun was still coming up, so everything had a slightly orange hue. I step outside through the door that Seth was pulled out of. This time, the ground was concrete and slightly overrun by weeds. I walk through the parking lot and turn to take one last look at the building before I leave. A chill runs through me as I see the lady in red. But she's not alone. Standing next to her are 4 figures, skinless and mangled, waving from the window. It's been a few years since that happened. I've never forgotten what happened that night. Everyone thinks they just disappeared one night. I've come to realize some things about the game, like how Landon made most of the rules up, and why the person in the circle is called the sheep. It's because the lady is a wolf in sheep's clothing, meaning she was probably wearing poor Mikkel's skin. I've also never gone past that building again because last year it was torn down to make space for a new office building. I've gotten on with my life, and eventually everything was somewhat normal. I actually have a younger sister who just started high school, which was about the age when I was when I decided to play the game. She came home from school today and asked, "Have you ever heard a story called The Lady in Red?"
This is something that happened a few years ago, and it still haunts my dreams every night. We all stood around the boat that had been provided to us. It was a freezing cold morning, and the mist hung heavy across the lake. There were 10 of us taking part in this expedition. It was led by a professor named Alan Connors, who had convinced some people with deep pockets to fund this. The rest of the team were made up of grad students and also 2 drivers whose job it was to control the 2 submersibles that had been provided. The other grad students were very giddy as they suspected that they had been specifically chosen by the professor. I knew that they had probably chosen us because he wouldn't have to pay us. The professor clapped his hands and we began to climb into the submersibles we were designated to. I was relieved that I wasn't claustrophobic, and it was beyond cramped in here. One of the other students, Adam, joked that he hoped that no one had beans last night, as a fart would probably suffocate us. It was met with half-hearted groans as he smiled away to himself. The professor gave him an annoyed look which wiped the smile off of Adam's face. I watched through the window as we were carefully lowered into the water. I felt a shiver run up my spine as we were finally fully submerged. Our pilot Billy started moving us forward and was using the sonar to see if he could find anything else down here. The lights from the sub lit up the lake and it gave the water an ominous look. We saw very little in the first hour or two, apart from a couple of startled fish who swam away almost as soon as they appeared. The other submarine came in over the intercom and announced that they had found an underwater cave. The professor instructed Billy to head over to the other sub so we could check it out. We moved both of the subs into the cave and sank down for almost a minute. We followed the course of the cave for almost 10 minutes until we finally surfaced inside a gigantic underground cavern. It was lit by some weird natural light that made it look both beautiful and also terrifying. Billy confirmed that the air outside was breathable, and we all climbed out to explore. Billy and the other pilots stood around the subs to make sure that nothing had happened to them. The professor began issuing orders and we rushed around following his instructions. We were paired in teams of 2 and I was stuck with Adam. We moved to the far end of the cavern and I had to listen to an endless stream of bad jokes from him. I hoped that my silence would shut him up, but he didn't take the hint. We were walking along the edge of the water on our way back to the others when I noticed something gigantic moving underneath the surface. I tried to point it out to Adam, but it had disappeared before he could see it. We reached the others and none of them had discovered anything of interest. One of the girls, Jenny, had found a small cave system, but had only gone in a small distance. The professor looked crestfallen as he had obviously expected to find something to placate his investors. Adam opened his mouth to tell another joke when he was cut off by an ear-splitting scream. We rushed in the direction of the screams to find Billy being dragged along the grounds towards the water. Something that looked like a tentacle was as black as the night sky was wrapped around his legs. Billy's face was contorted into a look of pure agony. I grabbed onto his arm and Adam grabbed the other and we attempted to pull him free. Another student, who I think was called George, rushed forward and began stomping on the tentacle. Another tentacle came out of nowhere and smashed into George and sent him flying across the cavern. I heard a sickening thud as his body collided with the far wall. We managed to pull Billy free in this time and began to move as far away from the water as possible. Billy kept screaming at the top of his lungs as his legs had been crushed. We watched as dozens of tentacles appeared out of the water and dragged the submersibles beneath the surface. The other pilot was nowhere to be found and I assumed he had already been dragged to his death. We gathered at the far corner of the cavern and tried to plan how we could escape. My eyes kept being drawn to George's corpse, which lay broken on the floor only a few feet away. We argued for hours with no one able to come up with an idea we all could agree to. We decided for the present time to get some sleep for the moment. We were all exhausted and it seemed like the best idea. Billy's screams were keeping me awake, but they were silenced after an hour. I awoke the next morning and looked over to see someone had slit Billy's throat overnight. No one admitted to doing it, but we all pretended like nothing had happened. It was decided that we would try the cave system that Jenny had found. We made our way over and it looked extremely tight, but we should all fit through. We started moving one by one through the caves with myself in the lead and Adam following close behind. We used our torches to help us navigate our way through. There were small holes on the edge of the cave and I kept seeing something darting in and out of them. I never got a chance to get a close look at them as they vanished before I got a close look. I reached the edge of the cave and stepped into a cavern that dwarfed the other cavern. It was at least 10 times bigger and I could barely see the edge in the distance. It was lit by the same strange light that had illuminated the other cavern. The others slowly came out of the caves and joined me in the cavern. We were standing around waiting for Jenny as she was in the very rear. After a few minutes, we began to get worried and I went back in to find her. I carefully made my way back as I kept getting a weird feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing in all directions as my mind was telling me that I was going to get attacked. I tripped over something and fell face first into the ground. My torch fell out of my hand and went out. My heart started pounding as I was now in complete darkness and I kept hearing skittering noises all around me. I began moving my hands along the ground in a desperate attempt to find my torch. My hand brushed against something with thick fur that darted away. I let out a screech and backed away and once again tripped. I landed hard on the ground, but luckily my hand came to rest on top of the torch. I quickly switched it on and shone it around me. I was greeted to the sight of Jenny's corpse, which looked like it had bites taken out of it. I shone the light around once again and froze as I saw dozens of what looked like spiders advancing towards me. They were the size of cats and had thick black fur with red eyes that were locked onto mine. I jumped up and began running forward, and hoping that I was heading towards the others, I burst out into the cavern and was greeted by a sea of worried faces. It took me a minute or two to get my breath back, and I then explained what I had found. The professor squeezed my shoulder to offer me some comfort. He then told me to follow him, and we began to make our way further into the cavern. It became clear that we were on a higher part of the cavern, and we reached an edge that gave us a view of what was below. I let out a gasp as I gazed down at the floor, which was littered with thousands of bones. Even from the distance, they seemed enormous, as if it was an elephant's graveyard. Many of the bones still had flesh on them, so we know that they had recently died. We went back to the others and we agreed to move down into the lower part of the cavern and see if there was anything on the far side. We all walked in silence as we passed by the bones. They were awe-inspiring, closer up as you could walk between them with your arms outstretched and not touch the opposite side. Whatever animal these belonged to was larger than any of us had ever seen. I froze when we heard a noise in the distance and rushed to cover. We then watched as a creature that looked like a dinosaur appeared out of the water and was pulling at the edge of the cavern. It began moving towards us in a lethargic way. It had a long neck that reminded me of a giraffe and a big bloated belly. I recognized it immediately as it looked like the pictures of the Loch Ness monster that had been circulating for years. It stopped a short distance from us and then rolled over dead. The professor began moving forward and I yelled at him to stop. He either didn't hear me or ignored me as he kept going. He placed his hands on Nessie's stomach and then let out a yell of triumph. He then turned to us and told us to take some pictures so that he can show everyone what he had found. Before any of us could reach for some cameras, there was a ripping sound and Nessie's stomach suddenly exploded. Thousands of those little spiders flooded out and quickly engulfed the professor. His screams were quickly silenced as they feasted on his flesh. 3 of the other students were consumed by the spiders before they even had time to react. The rest of us began running off in the opposite direction. I could hear the skittering noises of the spiders grow faint as we quickly outran them. We reached another system and rushed inside. It was now just myself, Adam, and another student named Lily. We used our torches and moved forward for almost an hour. We decided to try to get some sleep as we hadn't seen anything else living in quite some time. I had a dream of spiders feasting on my eyeballs and awoke in a cold sweat. We ate our meager supplies the next morning and then set off. We reached a room that was lit by sunlight that was streaming from high above. The walls had a number of cracks that could be used as handholds. We started carefully climbing with me once again leading the way. We were halfway up when I heard a scraping noise below and I looked down to see Lily losing her grip and then begin to fall. We locked eyes as she silently plummeted to the ground. She didn't make a sound as I almost vomited after watching her skull being shattered by a stone on the floor. Her dead eyes were still locked on mine and felt like they were blaming me for her death. Adam tapped me on the bottom of my foot, which awoke me from my trance, and I started climbing once again. We were near the top when Adam told me to shush as he could hear something. We both looked around but didn't see anything. One of the spiders suddenly jumped out of one of the holes we had been using as handholds and landed on Adam's face. Without thinking, he tried to use both his hands to rip it off. Time seemed to slow down as I watched the realization on his face as he was falling to his death. I turned away at the last moment but still heard the sickening thud as his body landed on the ground. I finished my climb and found myself in some woods. I made my way back to the nearest village and explained what happened to the locals. They didn't seem shocked at my story and let me ring my parents and offered me some food and drink. I tried to explain this to people, but no one ever believed me, and all of the people who went with me on that expedition are listed as missing. I was never able to find that cave that I escaped from. I beg you all to stay away from Loch Ness, as there are worse things living there than the Loch Ness monster.